All right, so we are live. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. Welcome to a live conversation today. My guest is Eric Muldrow. If you're not familiar with Eric, he is the host of Code Red Conversations. And 1 second. I forgot to mute that out. Code Red Conversations is a YouTube channel I discovered probably about a year ago now. And it is now my go-to channel for narrative-free analysis of officer-involved shootings or any kind of police interaction that is likely to make the news, that has made the news, the mainstream news that is. But when I don't want to consume the narrative, when I want to get, somebody just analyzing it from the point of view of, what happened, who did what, when, and did they follow procedure? Did they follow the law? Why did they do this? Why did, and so forth, to get just dispassionate analysis, I go to Eric. That's where I go. And I highly recommend that you do the same. So check out his channel and subscribe if you're a person who wants to kind of shut out the noise and get a sense of what really happened before you form an opinion. He's the guy. And I'm going to turn over for you to introduce your background because there's a reason he is the go-to guy. Eric.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate it. And I'm glad to have this opportunity to share with you and your audience. And because we all know this is a very important conversation. But a little bit about me. I'm a veteran, Army veteran. In 92, I got out of the Army and I started working in law enforcement. I began working, and I'm going to give you the abbreviated version, but I'm sure as the conversation goes, I'll add a few more details as we go.
Right.
Or as abbreviated as I can get in 20 years.
Right.
But after getting out of the Army, I started working at Westville Correctional Center in the state of Indiana. At that time, Westville was a maximum security prison. I worked there for 3.5 years. In 95, I moved to Las Vegas, did a little casino security. In 96, I was able to hire on with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department as a corrections officer again. And I did that for 10 years. And throughout that time, I worked as a gang intelligence officer and then in transportation officer, working court services. In 2006, I got a little bored with working in the jail. I wanted to do some things a little different. So I transferred out to the streets as a police or patrol officer. So throughout the course of my career, I worked as a firearms instructor, defensive tactics instructor, an active shooter response instructor. I was a member of the African American Recruitment Council. I was a crisis intervention team officer who deals with the suspects or citizens who are having mental health issues. And I retired in 2014. Over the last few years, as I began seeing everything that's taking place in our society when it comes to police interactions and people giving their opinion, and oftentimes giving opinions from a position of ignorance, and I don't mean that in an insulting way, just because of a lack of knowledge when it comes to tactics and officer safety and situational awareness. Right. I decided to jump into the conversation, and no pun intended, Code Red Conversations. I decided to jump into the conversation and start talking about right, and start talking about these things. So my goal is to change the narrative, change the discussion when it comes to police, because I think a lot of people have good hearts and good intentions, but they really don't understand a lot of areas that are problematic. When they see not every police encounter is a bad one. Some of the most popular ones that I'm sure every one of us can think about right now that we're very familiar with and they think are bad, I can tell you how they're not in many of those cases. Right. So I've started Code Red Conversations in 2018, and I've been blessed with many opportunities to speak in various places, local schools and some churches, and I've been able to do a little traveling where I'm able to actually discuss these issues on a much deeper level, because I really want people to understand things from the perspective of a police officer, and I also want to help educate and help train, considering I have a pretty deep background when it came to training in law enforcement. I also try to help educate officers to hopefully improve their tactics so they can be better and to minimize the bad ones when they do occur.
That's great. That's really great. And I want to tell my audience, who might be wondering at this point, well, Deb, why do you have this, experienced law enforcement officer, corrections expert, trainer, etc.? Why on this education channel? What is the deal? Well, I reached out to Eric as a fan because as I said, he's sort of my go-to guy. But I reached out because I realized that I kept coming across curricula that explicitly was teaching kids to fear police, to support programs like defund the police. And I started to wonder, because I am one of those lay people who's basically ignorant about these things. I have opinions, but so what? What could be the downside of this when it gets out to the streets? What's his take on, where these things interact in terms of forming opinions in children, possibly as young as kindergarten. And then as they come up through the years, if they have a fear of police, if they have a hatred of police. And so I said, hey, could you come on and address this a little bit? And so I'll ask you, Eric, while you're here, what do you think of these programs that specifically teach kids that, policing is inherently, for example, racist, that policing was created to, for white supremacist reasons, that all, the police are out there sort of hunting specifically Black people and so forth. Like well, what do you think of the messaging? And then secondly, what do you think the cost of that is to the child's life and existence?
Oh yeah, we can go on this one. This is like probably one of the more deeper topics. And once again, I appreciate you having me on here to discuss this. I can say this. I've actually had some dialogue and done a lot of studying on the impact or the history. Let's start there. The history of law enforcement. And for one, when people try to use that argument and try to make this claim that law enforcement is inherently racist, we have to go deeper and we have to understand that law enforcement existed long before America existed. Long before. I mean, you're talking about ancient civilizations, the Egyptians, Israel. We can go on and on, all through ancient Rome, Greece. All these different places had some element of a law enforcement, people there to act on behalf of the government for protection for the people, protect each other, because people can just be crappy to one another and just no getting around that. Whereas there is some truth that it has impacted our society and here in America, that it was used in some aspects to enforce slavery or to keep slaves from escaping. We also understand that that was just one portion of our country. It wasn't all of our nation at that time. And then we also need to be able to understand that things have changed dramatically over the years. And that's one thing I harp on over and over again. Like any entity whatsoever, political parties, the way people, laws, things have changed over the years. Law enforcement is not that. They are not going out there trying to hunt down. And I will sit up here and I will argue and debate with anyone who wants to offer any pushback that the police are not out there hunting down people of color, Black folks in particular. It's just not how. If you examine the numbers, don't listen to me. I always refer people to the Washington Post, for example, with their use of force database that they've been keeping since 2015. When you examine those numbers and when you understand the sheer volume of police and citizen interactions, hundreds of millions per year, hundreds of millions per year, and the very low number of shootings that take place and the very low number of times, the very small percentage of times officers actually use force when they come in contact with citizens. If we truly take the time to examine these numbers, we won't believe what we're being told, because that's basically what's happening. And how that impacts our young people, I'll say this much. I know that when I was on the African American Recruitment Council on LVMPD, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, I'll just say LVMPD here in Vegas as an officer, they were talking about going into the high schools and junior high schools and talking to these young people. And I said, if you wait till you get to the high schools and junior high schools, you've already waited too long. Because unfortunately, in a lot of places and within the Black culture, I can speak on the black culture as a black man. I know how we are led to believe that the police are against us, out to get us. And unfortunately, there are some instances where that has happened historically, and we can't shy away from that. We can't run away from that. But we should not allow ourselves to believe that just because we've had negative interactions with a one or two or a select number of cops, that same thing applies to all the 500,000 to 2 million cops that are in our nation. So if a young person or any person is led to believe and has been told this, that cops are hunting down black folks and black and brown bodies, however you want to term it, when you're led to believe that, when you hear that repeated over and over again, that's why you see so many young people fighting the police. That's why you see so many people running from the cops when they come in contact with them. And the spiral, the downward spiral that results from that, when you interact fatigue into a high stress situation, and I'm talking from the cops' perspective, that young person all they could be thinking about is, I just want to get away. But that officer doesn't know that. He's thinking, and so if you're fighting him, he could be thinking you're trying to knock me out and take my weapon. I don't know what you're trying to do. So It causes things to escalate easily, will cause things to escalate to the point to where an officer may need to use a greater level of force, and it could eventually get to the point to where the officer uses deadly force. And that's the worst case scenario. Right. But I really want people to understand that like when it's at the foundation, this mindset that the cops are out there trying to hunt down black people is causing more harm than good. It's not helping anybody.
Right. Right. And what about so in the schools, we know they have, for example, Black Lives Matter explicitly calls for, as one of their demands, fund counselors, not cops.
Yeah.
And what's your take on that? Not without speaking directly to Black Lives Matter, because that's a wormhole, right, or a rabbit hole we could go down, right? But just speaking to the demand, because they're not the only ones. There are others who've said counselors will solve the problem, or we need to get more mental health people and not this. And again, I'm speaking in terms of what's being taught to children. Right. So we know they're also saying it to adults in the news media, but there are two things. First of all, they're explicitly teaching it in the school, and kids pay attention. Kids watch the news, or they hear what's going on, or they hear their parents talking about things, or friends talking about it. So we can't pretend that just because something happened in an adult space, or adults were talking to adults, that kids are not dialed in to the messaging. And then add on top of that, it's being explicitly taught in the school. So the kids are hearing cops are bad, and it should be counselors, not cops. So, what do you think? Do they have a point? Do they not have a point? Is it a blend? What's the take on that?
Yeah, I would say they have a point, and there's a blend. I do believe that police officers have been basically given every issue. There was a failure to deal with a lot of the mental health problems in our nation long time ago, 60s, 70s, and probably even further back. So now you have a lot of people who wander the streets or just interact in public who are mentally ill, and they don't have any help whatsoever. And then when they start acting violently, or just even start acting strangely, the first person, or the only entity nowadays for people to call, are the police. There's there's an issue when it comes to staffing and people who are willing to take that opportunity as far as the mental health worker. But at the same time, we also have to understand that being mentally ill doesn't mean that that person can't be dangerous. They can be. Trust me. In my law enforcement career, in the whole over 20 years I worked in the field, the vast majority of times I ever had anyone act violently towards them were mentally ill people. And I'm not a little guy, 6'2". At that time, I was weighing about 250, 260. I had to lose a little weight, so I'm down to about 230 now. But at that time, I was never a guy who was out of shape, who couldn't take care of themselves. So the average citizen would see a guy my size and be like, okay, I really don't want to mess with this guy. and it helped make my job a little easier, being a bigger, oftentimes more muscular guy. But some people you come in contact with who are mentally ill, they don't look at you like that.
Right.
They look at you as a problem, or they may view you as someone totally different, a demon, whatever it may be, depending on the severity.
Sure.
And then they would lash out.
Right.
So there's the reality of some mentally ill people being dangerous. Right. So I think that there could be a good mixture of the two. There could be a situation. And let me back up real quick. I know to a large degree, though, across the nation, there is the CIT, or Crisis Intervention Team training. I think I went through CIT, which is when I mentioned earlier in my intro, where officers are trained to deal with people who are struggling with mental health issues. So I know that there are a lot of officers nowadays who are CIT certified and trained. And the vast majority of what cops do is talk. So cops are very well versed. Most cops are very well versed in how to communicate. And overall, and the fact that we have so many contacts and so few are actually heard demonstrates that for the most part, they know what they're doing. But I would say that when it comes down to when you start digging into deeper issues, one, you don't want the citizen, the social worker, going into a call or responding to a call with someone who's mentally ill and violent. Because what are you going to do if you don't have, all you have is a clipboard and, and your good intentions and your verbal skills, and you're dealing with someone who's violently mentally ill? What do you do there?
Right.
Because there may come a time where it escalates and the officer may need to step in, and sadly, force may need to be used, and sometimes that force may need to be deadly force. So right. I think that there's a good balance. I think that it would be good if they can get more information when it comes to some of these mental health calls.
Yeah.
And have a responding social worker respond to some. But if there's any evidence, maybe a history of violence from that individual, or they're acting violently right then and there, or they're just really irate, then I think it would be good to have, because in a lot of our calls, a firefighter or a EMT arrives. If you can have an entity like that when it comes to mental health, who also responds to a lot of these calls, I think having that good balance could make things a whole lot easier for everyone.
So from a standpoint of education, it sounds like one thing that would be helpful is educating the public, and kids included,
Absolutely.
That if the need ever arises for you to make a call to the police officer because someone around you is acting strangely or acting out or just screaming, yelling, whatever, to the point where you can't calm them down or you can do anything, make sure you give quality information. Like, even if we just told kids about how police officers work these issues, so that instead of just having it be, cops are scary, cops are bad things happen when there's police officers, here, look at these 5 things on TV, right, out of the hundreds of millions of interactions. If people understood that, they're trained to deal with these kinds of things. If you see someone acting strangely and you want to call the police, give them as much detail as you can. Like, I think knowledge calms people down. And so you have to balance out the sense of, like, these can be serious, dangerous situations, kids, but they can also you can be a part of making it better if you give good quality information when you call, or if you see police show up and if it's a neighbor, let's say, or the person, and they've been using drugs, as an example. There's also a lot of fear of, like, I don't want to tattle. I don't want to say anything bad. Don't talk to cops. But I think if they understood that the more information the police officer has on the person they're interacting with, like, imagine if they knew going right into it that George Floyd was on so much fentanyl. Right. And I mean, they discovered this as they went on, and I don't want to go into that case because all other kinds of nuanced issues. That's another one. But just pick any person, like, if you're using certain kinds of substances, that is going to dramatically impact your behavior. your response to being confined, your response to having somebody physically close to you. There could be, all kinds of things. If you know the person's schizophrenic, that means they could have paranoia issues, which makes them even more scared. So then the police officer might know, I must stand way back. I don't, because, but so information is key. And I don't think kids understand enough. It's like cop bad, civilian good combination. I'm on the civilian side. It's like you have to pick a side, us, them, instead of realizing that, these situations most of the time go fine and you never hear about them. But you as the person around, or if you're the person getting stopped, okay, how you act and what you do can make a big difference. And if there's a way to teach kids that doesn't make them like you're blaming the victim, or you're blaming like it's on you to save your own life. That's not what I'm saying as a teacher. I'm just saying it's kind of like a partnership here,
Absolutely.
You if you get pulled over and so forth, like your responsibility is to yourself, right? To stay alive and like be, take care of yourself and take care of anybody with you if you have a child or another person. But it's not specifically to get away. It's not to hurt the cop. It's not to any of that. It's not to people who aren't present. My best friend, I don't want to get him in trouble. Like, no, you got to think about, and so I feel like telling somebody a very either or message, like cops are bad or cops are always right. Like both those messages are not good.
100%.
They just need to know kind of, some better teaching as far as that goes. So in the school though, now I know there's some schools that have just kicked out law enforcement altogether. They've just said like, get out. And some have said, we're going to replace you with counselors. Others have said, we're reducing you to you're here, but your interaction is like extremely limited, whatever. What's your take on law enforcement in or around a school?
Oh, I think it's very necessary, and it can act as a deterrent when it comes to danger, violence, someone coming in there, a school shooting or something along those lines. And that's something that can't necessarily be measured.
Right.
I think that there's if we look at various sources, there's an author by the name of, I'm looking at one of his books, John Lott. He deals with the issue when it comes to guns, and without going too deeply into that topic, but he has a website, I think it's called crimeresearch.org, and it's organization that he started. And they talk about soft targets, hard targets when it comes to school shootings and things like that. And there's evidence to suggest that soft targets, meaning places where guns aren't allowed, are more likely to be hit than ones where you don't know or where guns can be. So if a individual who decides they want to shoot up a school sees a police car when he pulls up to wreak his havoc, he's probably less likely. He'll probably think about it and say, hey, you know what? This may not be the best place to go. Now,
so you're saying it's like a protective measure for the kids.
Oh, no question.
Okay.
Yeah, no question about it. When it comes to protecting the kids, and also even in them coming in contact with law enforcement and seeing that, hey,
good point.
Officer Smith over here ain't a bad guy, and he's a cop. He's been doing it for 5, 10, 15, but however many years. So I think when you just when they say, okay, we're just pulling cops out of the schools, people start to ask why. Well, we think some students were fearful and they were worried about the police being there and they didn't feel safe. That's the term I was looking like, one of the popular terms we hear nowadays. They didn't feel safe with these officers around, which is mind-blowing in and of itself. But I think on so many aspects, it can continue to perpetuate this mindset that cops aren't to be trusted. They were there. We did have them as school resource officers, but now we took them out. We replaced them with counselors. Like, I think education, it can be very beneficial and helpful in a lot of situations, dare I say most. But sometimes you just need somebody there who just acts as a protector, because when it's all said and done, people as a Christian man, theologically speaking, I would say that there's the inherent issue when it comes to the sin nature, but just thinking in a more practical term when it comes to just what observations, things that we've seen, we oftentimes see things pop up. There's school shootings or shootings take place when kids are on their way home. Things like that happen regularly. It doesn't happen daily, but it happens often. And you need people. And sometimes education, you could have someone who's knowledgeable and they know things, but they still do crappy things. So we have to understand their needs. When it's all said and done, I think we can almost summarize everything that we're talking about is that there needs to be a balance. There always needs to be a balance. You have to have cops who are trained and who know what they're doing. Because the reality is, as pro cop as I may be, I've worked with some crappy behind cops who had no business being in uniform. There's no doubt about it. I've seen some horrific shootings, and I'm like, what in the world was this guy thinking? And somehow he got, he or she made it snuck through the cracks. Somehow. There are some police departments that bring on more officers, even though some of them shouldn't have made it through the police academy or through field training, which is like on-the-job training, but they wanted bodies. I've actually heard people say that.
Well, do you know what? I wonder if that's another thing that people need to understand as we're talking, the title is sort of like the cost of it, the trouble with doing this is if we teach people to fear the cops, we teach kids to fear the cops, that I'm hearing an echo. Is that coming from you?
Test.
I don't, maybe it's me. Okay. So
I don't hear anything.
Okay. I think it went away. So what's happening is that good cops who are super thoughtful and well-trained and maybe been on the job a long time, so they're closer to retirement, or they feel like they have enough good background and good reputation, they could go get a higher paying job in private security, whatever the case may be, they're leaving. And they're like, or they're defunding and they're just kind of getting rid of sort of units that help prevent, like I know in New York, they got rid of certain kinds of units that were crime prevention units. And now they got more on the street crime because they're not doing the prevention activities. And so the scary thing is they're more likely to get the less well-trained, not exactly the right fit personality wise cops on the job because you pushed the fear and the negative narratives about the cops. It's sort of like, the inverse of what you claim to want to have. And it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I don't think that kids, teenagers in particular, I don't think they understand that either, that you might need a cop someday. You right now, you perceive yourself as being on the receiving end of a bad cop someday. Okay, it could happen. They could pick you out falsely. But what about that time, which is just as likely to happen, that someone is coming after you and you need that cop to protect you? Okay. And they're not there because they've been defunded. And we think about the neighborhoods most vulnerable and therefore the kids most vulnerable at all ages are the very kids they claim the cops are hunting.
No question. And they're the ones that are going to be harmed.
They're the ones that are going to be harmed. So I as a teacher, I feel like it's almost cruel to teach kids to fear the cops, to hate the cops, whatever, because these populations are the most likely to need the cops when the chips are down, like when there's somebody who's in their neighborhood that ought not be in their neighborhood.
Right.
And I don't know. So it sounds like I hear you, and you're saying like a balance, that we got to have the right people trained the right way, have kids, taught the right way. What are some things that you would recommend? Like, take, for example, the conversation. I hear this a lot when parents talk about, I had the conversation with my black son or my black daughter. They always frame it that way, right? What do you think of the conversation?
I'm glad you brought that up, because actually I'm working on a course right now that deals specifically with that very issue, because I think that it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to let people know how to interact with law enforcement. The unfortunate part about it is it's typically given from the perspective of a terrified parent who thinks that their kid getting shot, gunned down, beat up by a cop is more likely to happen. Now another rabbit hole we can, we want to avoid is the crime rate in the inner city and in plenty of these black communities. We don't necessarily want to go down that route, but let me tell you something. When it comes to the Center for Disease Control, when it talks about the highest killers of black folks, police ain't anywhere near that top. I know that for a fact. When it comes to young men, I believe age 11 through 44, homicide. So, but yet we're continually told that cops are our biggest fear or something along those lines, which is garbage. It just isn't the case.
Right.
I think the talk is a vital and important issue, and it is very needed because, what I'm working on is having a short acronym that's easy, a few easy tools, keys to remember, so that when you come in contact, your loved ones, your kids, your spouse, whomever it may be, you come in contact with a police officer, instead of acting emotionally, you may go through these things. If you go through this with your family, they'll think about these things. They'll understand, they'll remember certain key points. They'll make sure that when a cop is calling you to stop, you stop.
Sort of like a stop, drop, and roll, but for police interaction.
Exactly. Because there's that officer could be completely justified in stopping you. Let me give you a little example. I remember a few years ago, we were on a call, and it was downtown Las Vegas. A store had just gotten robbed. Across the radio, they give the description: black male, dreadlocks, blue sweatshirt with a backpack. One of my partners stopped somebody who matched the description. He is going off. Man, y'all just stopped me because I'm black. He's going on and on. He's still my partner's. He's still doing his job. He stopped a guy and he's making sure it's not him. They get a citizen or the victim comes around and they say, okay, that's not him. He's still angry. And then I was able to talk to him. And I just said, hold on one second. Once we found out that it wasn't him, I told him, I said, come here. I brought him around towards my car. We have our computers, our mobile data centers, MDT, in our cars. And I just said, I turned it around so we could see it. I said, look at right here. Look at the description of the suspect. I said, put yourself in the situation if you are the victim. If someone says that they see a black male, dreadlocks, blue sweatshirt with a backpack, which he had everyone. I think maybe his sweatshirt was green or something like that. But at a distance, in a heightened stress situation, people can easily get their colors mixed up. I said, what would you want me to do if someone matching that description walked by me and I just let them go because they were black and I didn't want to be offensive? I said, you would be pissed off at me, and rightfully so, as a cop. You would want me to do my job. I said, man, ain't nobody stopping you based on your skin color. And I said, I want you to take, and he sat up there and he totally understood where I was coming from. But it took me taking a little bit of time to educate him as to, okay, what were our motivations? It had nothing to do. We had a suspect description and he happened to match it.
Right.
I mean, nowadays that whole phrase, oh, you matched the description, is kind of used as, oh, that's just an excuse for.
But you showed him. You showed him.
Absolutely. I showed him exactly the information that we got. We didn't send this call out. It was a citizen calling us and saying this is what happened. And he was 400 meters away from the crime scene. Yeah, we're going to stop you. We're going to stop you. He understood that. He shook my hand. He was like, officer, I appreciate you just giving me that little bit of information. And I said, man, just keep that in the back of your head, man. Every time a cop stops you, or if it ever happens again, don't just assume that people are trying to stop you because of your skin color. Because I said, I can tell you right now, the vast majority of times that ain't the case. And he appreciated it. But like you said, it was a little bit of education. I took the time to just calm the situation down and just have a conversation. And unfortunately, sadly, there are plenty of officers who don't do that. They feel like they just get in the car and they take off and they're on to the next one. and you got a citizen here who has a bad impression of law enforcement, and you can't take 2 minutes to talk to this dude and calm this guy down.
Yeah, because it's scary. I mean, if somebody comes up and stops you and it's not you, I mean, that's terrifying, right? I mean, let's be honest. That's scary.
I've kicked in people's doors before,
yeah,
thinking it was a violent domestic violence call. I mean, literally booted in their door, and it was the wrong apartment.
Oh my God.
And I've got this guy down at gunpoint. Me and my partner says, yeah, it was apartment 317.
Oh, geez.
We kick in this door, gunpoint, got this guy down, wrong apartment.
Oh man.
It was like 2 doors down.
Oh man.
Once we got done, I made a beeline back there and explained everything to that guy. I said, man, we got wrong information. We apologized. I mean, I went above and beyond. I mean, I sat there as long as it took for him to be able to calm down. I said, I'm going to stay here until he's cool. He understands, man. We had no ill will towards him.
Right.
Sadly, we get a lot of bad information. And we fixed his door. We did all that kind of stuff. We shook hands. He appreciated it. His wife appreciated it. Everybody but like I said, it's unfortunate that, so when people have this, I think when some people have a disdain towards law enforcement, sadly, in some situations, it's justified.
It's justified,
because
right?
They came across 1, 2, 3, however many knuckleheaded cops,
right,
who didn't look at them as being just like them, a human being, right, who has emotions and feelings. So one thing that I really try to emphasize is that there are 2 aspects of these police interactions. You have the human side. I mean, you have the citizen side, and you have the police officer side. And right, you have to understand that there's more than just your perspective, regardless of what side you're on. If you're the cop, there's that citizen who's on the other end, and we have to take that into consideration. Right. Or if you're the citizen, there's an officer over there who might be thinking that his life might be on the line, and he has to consider that as well.
Exactly. Now, somebody asked in the comments a while back, but I wanted to come back to it. We were talking about people who are mentally ill. Is there sort of a best method for dealing with that type of situation? Like, let's say, like you get there or you get information in advance, and I assume you don't have access to their medical information.
No, we don't have that. I mean, unless we have a family, it depends on the call.
Well, so if the family member tells you, but if the family,
a good bit.
Okay. But if it's just a total stranger wandering in the streets or whatever, and you assess the situation and you can assess that this person is, and can you tell, are they on something or they're mentally ill? I mean, how can you tell? That's
very tough. Very tough.
That's got to be really difficult.
Yeah. There's some mood enhancer, whatever you want to call it. There's some drinks or there's some drugs that have people responding a certain way. But it's really difficult especially when you're dealing with a stimulant like crack cocaine or methamphetamine, meth, or
right. Or somebody just posted like deaf or hard of hearing. Like, how quickly are you able to if you arrive on scene and it's a call about somebody acting strangely? Let's just say that, okay? And I mean, what kind of steps do officers go through? Because one of the things that the TV news does a terrible job of, and I'm thinking specifically of the case where the guy who had the knife and he had a history of mental illness and he was off his meds and he charged the cop with the knife and the cop shot him. And they were saying, oh, he's mentally ill. Why'd you shoot him? But I mean, he charged him with a knife. Right. Yeah. So, but in some situations where it's like, okay, they're not obviously armed, but they're, doing whatever. Like what's your process for ascertaining what's going on? Or does that not matter as much as figuring out how to de-escalate the situation, just whatever it is?
I would say that it takes a little bit of all of that, because if you understand that someone is mentally ill, you'll try to approach it a little differently. You won't get up on them. For one thing, you'll, like you mentioned earlier, keep your distance. Here's a good example, I hope it's a good example for the person who was asking the question. I remember getting a call on a lady who was just standing on the sidewalk, and it was pretty cold. It had to have been pretty chilly because here in the desert, it can get pretty cold at night. She's standing with a little tank top on. It's like 11 o'clock at night. She's standing on the sidewalk, and she'd pretty much been standing there for like 20 minutes, and she didn't move like at all. just standing in one place, just staring out into the street. So I arrive on scene, and I could tell that the officer who was my backup was pretty young, pretty new. He just looked like a baby out there. So I'm talking to her from a distance. I'm trying to call him like, ma'am, I'm trying to get her attention, and she's not really responding to me. So then I'm like, okay, I need to make sure that she gets taken care of. And I'm going to have to get physical with her, not to hurt her, but just to secure her so medical can come and they can take her to a hospital and she can get properly evaluated. So I sat back and I tried to talk to her. I assessed the situation, where we are, where it's late at night. It's like 40 degrees. She's outside with just a tank top on. If she continues to stand out here, it could develop, it can get a whole lot worse. She can become hypothermic. It can be all kinds of problems. So let me make sure, I know I have medical, what we call holding short, meaning wait until the scene gets safe, then we call them in there, and then they do their job. So I just told the other officer, I said, man, I'm about to grab her, so I need you to grab her other arm. Mm-hmm. And I said, so I told him that because I'm like, I don't want her swinging on me, and then I have to escalate the amount of force that I need to use. I'm like, I'm going to grab her arm. You need to be like right there with me. And he's like, okay. So as soon as I grabbed her arm, man, I'm telling you, she went to pull and start swinging on me, but he grabbed her other arm. She started kicking. We picked her up. We placed her down on the ground. We handcuffed her. We called medical to come get her. And then we're able to get her transported without injury, without issue. Okay. But it was because I had the training. I had the experience. During my time in the county jail, I worked as a medical liaison officer for about a year. And part of that was every morning I had to do psych call. And we're talking about people who just got brought into the jail, severe psychosis, severe mental illness, some of these people. I mean, there's some people who I don't want to get graphic, but I just got to give you guys a little bit of an example. They would take their feces and they would put it in there. One dude put it on his head because he believed that people were talking to him, like demons were trying to communicate to him through his brain. And that was the only way he was able to block it out. And he made little horns out of some of the poop on the top of his head. And I had to go in there like face to face pretty much with the psychiatrist and have a conversation and we had to talk to this guy. And thankfully he didn't wig out. Wow. But I was just like, man, oh man. But this is like some of the levels of how ill some people can get. So there's a process of having the knowledge of being able to understand what you're dealing with, being able to identify someone quickly who's mentally ill, and then trying to assess it and trying to respond with the appropriate amount of force if necessary, or just in general. Because some people, the vast majority of folks, you can just have a conversation with and they'll comply. But when you're dealing with mental health issues, then things get wide up and you just don't, it's very unpredictable, sadly.
And, this is, and what's so interesting is, I'm a grown woman, right? And I've watched more than my fair share of like cop shows, detective programs, and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, I've seen some things, but it's fiction. So you're kind of like, whatever. And then you see what they show on the TV news. And of course they select for greatest sort of drama, like sensationalism. So we really don't see these kind of stories. We don't hear about them. We don't hear about the talk downs. We don't hear about the happy endings. Okay.
Oh my gosh. They happen all the time too.
Right. And so I feel like, again, coming back to education, I just got an education. Like you just educated me. And so, for example, I can then have to, I can then talk to my kids about, different things. If I were going to have the talk, and I have had a talk with my children because my eldest will be driving soon. So I've had a conversation with her about how to conduct herself if she's ever pulled over. First of all, she's female. And so I said, if you're driving alone and it's night and you're scared and somebody comes up behind you with a light on, or even in a cruiser, there's certain rights that you have to feel safe about, letting them know that you're going to stop, but you don't feel comfortable stopping right where you're at. Like if it's in the middle of nowhere or something. So I've tried to talk to my kids about like how always keep your hands in sight once you stop the car, open the window just enough because, to be able to speak, but keep your hands in sight, this kind of thing. So I've been trying to like have a conversation with my own children about, they're doing a job. And you might not like what they're doing. You might totally disagree. You might think they're 100% wrong.
Right.
And that's okay. But you do what you got to do in the moment because you got to get home alive, or you got to get to the end
That's
of this
it right there.
interaction, and then you can complain all day long. Then we can sit and have a conversation about how wrong he was. I mean, I've been there. I was pulled over for speeding on my way to jury duty one time, and the guy and it was so unfair because the guy like jumped out right where the signage, there was no signage, like he placed himself. But I remained calm and I did all the things, and I had my day in court. I was like, I'm going to argue this, and I showed up, and he didn't. And so it was, and I had pictures and all that kind of stuff. So dismissed. So you can teach your kids these things. I just think there's such a high cost to only talking about the negative. So I think you can acknowledge, like you said, a balance. I think we can acknowledge that there have been some bad situations. So we don't have to disregard feelings and disregard, as they call it, lived experience. Okay.
Right.
But we can say, look, let's think realistically. Do you know a kid who behaved badly? Right? Do you know somebody who behaved badly? Does that mean all your friends behave badly all the time?
Right.
Have you ever behaved badly? Does it mean you behave badly all the time? Right. So you can kind of get them to relate and then say, like, give them the balanced information of, there's a reason we have police. There's a reason this is going on. And then, I don't know, that's kind of my take. What else, as we're kind of like coming to the close of this, if you're thinking of the different stakeholders that you'd want to talk to about educating kids about police interaction, they would be like parents, teachers, and maybe even like school administrators or people who make this curriculum. Oh, and the media too. To remember when dealing with kids, what would be your messages to them so that we can do a better job of communicating with children in America about police officers? Because none of us want anybody to get hurt.
Right.
Nobody, even perpetrator, even people who are actually suspects who need to have their day in court. We don't want people to get hurt. That's the bottom line. Okay.
I would say that you have pretty much kept that the main focus where we should be wrapping it up is to educate yourself. Actually take time to listen to counter arguments. Listen to the other side. There's a popular video that goes around that most people who spend any time on social media have probably seen, where there was this BLM activist, I believe he was, and I think it was somewhere in Arizona, might have been the Phoenix area.
Okay.
And he volunteered to go through police use of force training. And he was very much out there protesting against police brutality. But then he spent a day in use of force training, and it changed everything, his mindset. It didn't mean that he wasn't still an activist. It didn't mean that he still didn't care about bad police uses of force, but he understood that there was a perspective that he wasn't familiar with. I've had people literally try to argue with me about police tactics. People who have no knowledge of have never been in any type of tactical situation in their lives. I had one guy, he's a school teacher here in Las Vegas, and I know his pastor, and he started following me because I did a sit-down podcast with the pastor, and he started talking about, we were talking about the whole BLM thing, George Floyd and all this kind of stuff. And this guy, I don't think he's ever, I don't want to talk bad about the guy, but I'll just say he's never had a tactical experience whatsoever. And he's basically trying to school me as in, okay, well, this cop should have done this in this situation. I'm like, my man, I'm sorry, but you just don't know what you're talking about. Like, you have no clue. Right. It's like me stepping into the school and teaching you and trying to tell you how to do your job as a school teacher. And
probably saying, well, do better than they do telling you how to be a cop.
Right. I mean, it just blew my mind how some people will sit back and, man, they get their opinion and they get in their fortified bunkers, and you will not change my mind regardless of what you have to share. But if I can get some people to open their minds up just a little bit to see the side of the cop in some of these questionable, I'm not even talking about all of them. Some of the ones that are just a little more questionable, if they would just say, hey, you know what? Maybe there's some aspect to this shooting, to this use of force that I just don't get. So open your mind and be willing to say, I'm teachable. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to understand. Because once you do that, then it just demonstrates that, one, that you're seeking honesty, you're seeking truth. You're not just someone who's willing to push out their opinion.
Right.
And I think that aspect, that one thing alone could have such a major impact. But the sad reality is that police have everything related to policing has just all been piled up into this one whole movement, when a political movement. And they're using this amongst many other issues as a means of control, and they try to change our culture radically. Because you better believe that they're still going to have some element of law enforcement here in our country. But who's going to be doing it? Is it going to be the state, local governments, or is it going to be coming from a bigger
we don't
government?
need like state police with like a capital S, right?
Yeah, or and federal police type of thing.
And that's such a good point. Because there was that Chaz thing, right? That was, and it, people talk about it's like going to be this separate zone, but they were policing it, and they were doing it badly, and people got hurt. Because
they didn't have social workers showing up when they had drama. They had armed guards patrolling those areas.
So it's such a good point for people to understand. If you defund the police, someone is going to end up policing your neighborhood. Absolutely. And the difference is they're not going to work for you. They're not going to work for you at all. Now, for all the complaints that people have about police investigating themselves and all this, and we can, that's a whole other video, but at least there is some accountability, okay? You get some people in your neighborhood who just decide one day they've had enough with the lawlessness and the whatever. We go back to a time period in far distant American history where things get vigilante-esque, where you get whoever's got the most guns becomes in charge of the neighborhood.
Yep.
And we know there are neighborhoods right now in the United States where that has already occurred.
No doubt.
Where police are kind of I'm out. There's no point to even going in there because it's so chaotic. And I think if we taught kids a more balanced understanding of the history of policing, of the purpose of policing, which is, by the way, to protect your rights.
No doubt.
Kind of pretty much first and foremost, if they understood that they have, these rights to life, right to, in addition to the rights they have when they're interacting with police, they have certain rights that the police are there to protect. Now, it is a myth that police are supposed to come and protect you from all harm. They can't. As a practical matter, they can't. And oftentimes they come afterwards to get the information. But the only way that your property rights, your physical life, is protected is the deterrent quality of knowing that someone's going to enforce those laws, so that if someone broke them and you weren't there, the cop wasn't there to stop it, someone's going to follow up and bring those people to justice. So there's a deterrent quality. You remove that, you defund police, you remove policing from neighborhoods, the deterrent is kind of gone. And now the neighborhood belongs to the biggest, toughest, strongest bully on the block.
Yeah, I think that you nail it really well, because when you look at, and I tell people this, I really try to get people to understand this. You have so many layers of checks and balances in law enforcement. I know a lot of people don't understand that, but we have nationally, we have the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which protects your rights, rights to an illegal search and seizure. And that involves me as a cop coming and saying that I'm going to pat you down or search you. There are legal parameters that limit how I can search you. There are legal parameters that limit how long I can detain you. So I love when you gave the analogy when you got stopped. You didn't fight your battles on the side of the road. You dealt with it. You waited till you had your day in court, and you won. And I think too many people are convinced that, you can't, you can't fight the law, or you can't fight City Hall, whatever the old saying goes. But the reality is, people take cops to court. Cops have to go to internal affairs, and that's policing ourselves. But let me tell you something: no cop I know wants to go to internal affairs, because because it is. I'm telling you, this ain't the 70s or the 60s policing. We're talking about the 21st century. And I'm not saying that there isn't an element of good old boy syndrome going on, because that's just a reality. But any agency I've worked or I've been to internal affairs, and I knew I didn't do anything wrong, but I still hated going to internal affairs. I still hated every bit of it. But you have citizens review boards. You have local. You have the district attorney. You have attorney generals statewide. You have all these different levels. You have on the federal level. There's so many ways and so many things that check the power of a police officer. So I just want to encourage people out there, if you feel like you have a legitimate complaint, trust the system, document, get the officer's information, get the location of the stop, get the time of the stop, look at his vehicle.
Yeah.
I
would so much rather teachers were teaching kids the Bill of Rights, like literally,
yes,
and about equality under the law, as opposed to, like that doesn't count or whatever. I really wish that they would spend time on this and younger, like 5th grade, and really help people understand, like, these are your rights. And the better you know your rights, the calmer you can be about holding people accountable to respect your rights. Because I find that, the people panic the most are the people who think that cops can do anything to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like they could do anything to them. They could disappear them. They think it's like Soviet Russia or something.
Yeah, or the ones who don't really know what they, well, you didn't read me my rights. Well, I didn't interrogate you. Exactly. So I don't have to read you your rights. There's a big difference there. There's a time you hear people love to use that, but
they can't, you can't cuff somebody without reading rights. Like, you're not under arrest. I just need to contain you here for a second while I search your car, which I have probable cause to do because et cetera. So, I mean, I guess what it all comes down to, like I said, is, education, and people who are in the role of educator need to understand that you need to spend, in my personal opinion, tell me if you agree, twice as much time educating your students about their rights and the particulars of what police do and are permitted to do and not do and so forth than you do on the opinions about policing, because that's a whole separate conversation. And I feel like most teachers don't have enough perspective and context to effectively speak to that. Like I said, and even at my age, I have enough humility to know what I don't know. That's why I watch your channel. I don't know, and I'm not listening to CNN. Okay. So I think that
please don't.
Right. And so I think teachers should have the same. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. And if your student comes to you and goes, did you see that? Blah, 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 there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know all the particulars, and neither do you. And understand, teach our kids to be responsible consumers of this media too. I know you saw something on TV and I know it looks really scary and I know what they're saying, but the truth of the matter is we really don't know everything yet. So the best thing to do right now is to just wait for more information. Like, that message alone would be so important for kids to kind of calm them down, because being afraid is rarely a good place to be, especially when you're already a pre-rational person. You're a teenager or even younger. Your brain doesn't work rationally. Okay. So to those kids who might not get that message, do you have any message for them in case they come across this video? What would you say to kids between the ages of 11 and 25, or so?
That's a pretty broad range there.
Okay. 11 and 17. Let's keep it to K-12. Let's keep it to my zone. Okay.
You know what? I just want to say, don't just believe everything you see on the internet. And I would say by now they already know that. You can't believe everything you see on the internet. And how many situations, I want to keep it short because I know you have to wrap it up. How many situations have we seen over the last few years where we saw a portion of a video and then a few days, weeks later, we get much greater context. Jacob Blake, the Covington High School kids, Jussie Smollett. We got a bit of information. Everybody was up in arms, and then the truth comes out. Jussie Smollett was at a place where he had sexually assaulted someone. Not Jussie Smollett. I'm talking about Jacob Blake.
Jacob Blake, right?
Was at a place where he sexually assaulted someone prior, had a warrant out for his arrest, or he was a stay-away order. He had a knife. He gets into a scuffle with the police, picks up the knife and walks away towards his vehicle, and he ends up getting shot. there are times, so many times where we see something and the media knows that and it gets us enraged. But then down the road, and you may not ever hear about the fact that there was a retraction or that another additional information came out because they already got you. They got you angry. They got you pissed off, and they did their job. There are people out there, I honestly believe there are people out there with various motives who want to keep you angry, and they want to manipulate you by giving you a series of half truths.
Right.
So be wise enough to investigate and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I may not be in a popular conversation right now because I'm willing to sit back and take my time and learn and educate myself. But you will be if you see half of a video where you just see an officer slam somebody, maybe that dude, maybe that dude maybe that incident was completely justified. Maybe it wasn't. But what's the problem with waiting, a day or two to see what really happened?
Well, and I think, I would also, if I had a classroom full of kids, I might tell them to, watch things like what you do. Go find independent journalists with the background and the maturity to like analyze it and break it down and explain it to you, learn a thing or two. And, lastly, what I might say to the kids is remember that you are just as likely, what we said before, to need a police officer to help you someday as to be on the receiving end, probably more likely. And that if there's a defund the police movement, if these people who are sitting up there in their, fancy CNN office or whatever they're doing, putting out these stories, they're not the ones who are going to be affected by defund the police. Their neighborhood's still going to have security. There is security doorman building. They might even have a bodyguard. Who knows what? Like, are they going to be affected negatively or positively by this? Or are you? Is your community? Is your mom? Is your little sister? Or whatever. So I think I really don't like the manipulation that goes on of children ever on any topic. But like I said, I wanted you to come on, and I thank you so much for doing this for me and for the audience, because I know most of my audience are real concerned about what kids are learning and not learning. And this is one that is so, so important. So any last comments that you want to say to everybody about any of this?
You know what? Just like if we had someone who assumed the worst about us simply because of what we're wearing or what our outer, garment is, whether it's our skin or our clothing, but they assume something simply based on that, I think every one of us would be offended, and rightfully so. Right. If you come in contact with a police officer and you automatically assume the worst of them simply based on the fact that he is a cop, how is that any different? How is that any different?
People do things. People do bad things.
Right. People
and
do
a cop
things.
is a
not
person.
Uniforms, not skin colors, not genders, none of that. It's individuals who do bad. Treat people, including cops, the way you want to be treated. Give them the benefit of the doubt. And then if they decide they want to act stupid, okay, I'm gonna remember that officer right there, Officer Jackson over there. Okay, I'm gonna remember him. I'm gonna make sure I avoid him to the best of my ability.
And report him if he did something really legit
no
wrong.
Question.
Right?
And use that chain. Use that whole setup that is there to keep cops in check, and you'll be better off for it. The system works. Trust me. I have friends of mine that I've seen go to prison. Friends of mine I see go to jail. Friends of mine that I've seen who are terminated. Cops been on the force for years. Use the system, and it actually works.
That is great advice. Like, don't believe people tell you that they won't listen, whatever. And hey, Derek Chin's going. So, right?
I didn't hear you. Kind of faded out.
I mean, we know that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Oh, okay. I said, and Derek Chauvin's going to jail. So the system works, right? Case in point.
And check out Code Red Conversations. Check out my channel. I have over 100 videos.
Code Red Conversations YouTube, you guys. Like I said, my go-to channel for all things, law enforcement analysis. This is where you're going to get the breakdown, agenda-free, narrative-free. And that's what we all need these days, because I'm always looking other sources. I don't pay any attention to the news. So I appreciate you. Thank you so, so much for this. I really am so grateful for the collaboration, and thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
You're very welcome. You too.
Thanks, everybody.